Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, and he says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I'm lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Can we actually read that together once? Let's read. "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I'm lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Amen. May we be good hearers of the word and better doers. May we love Jesus deeply. May we trust what Jesus says, and may we follow Jesus well. You may be seated wherever you can find a seat. Just find it. It's on the floor. We're just gonna have a little minute. It'll be quick. Just go ahead and find a seat. You won't have to be sitting long, but just find a seat. Fantastic. We're talking about being a people of rest. Our whole series, our whole idea on Wednesday chapels, it's about practice, it's about lifestyle, it's about becoming a sort of people of rest. What sort of person do you want to be? Last week, we talked about our rhythms, our lifestyles being shaped by our habits, our patterns, our rhythms, our lifestyles. We looked at Matthew 11 as Jesus calls us to take on his yoke and learn from him. This week, as we consider who are we becoming and how do we become, we want to consider for just this week our relationships. Nothing impacts us being a people of rest nearly as much as our relationships. Now, there was a recent study of about 20,000 adults in America. 54% said they feel like no one actually knows them well. 54%. 56% said that the people they surround themselves with are not necessarily with them. 40% said that they lack companionship, their relationships aren't meaningful, and that they feel isolated from others. Now, in Japan, they've been facing what they're actually deeming as a loneliness epidemic. So much so, which it's led different companies to create robots as companions. So it's not like the people are feeling so much so that they don't have true intimacy, true relationship, true depth and companionship and friendship, that they're actually making robots to fill that void. And even in the UK, they recently appointed in the UK, because they said over 9 million people in a survey said that they experience constant loneliness. So they've actually appointed what they're calling a loneliness minister, a minister of loneliness, someone in the national government designed to really help partly with the issue of loneliness. Have you ever experienced the FOMO? Like that experience where you look on your feed and you're like, dang, I wasn't invited to that. Like your late night Applebee's, I don't know if anyone eats there. Have you ever felt though the sting of being alone, or being surrounded by people, like a room like this, but going, oh, if they really knew me, if they only really knew. Well, let me say this, and I really do mean this, and I'm not trying to be trite. You're not alone. You're not alone in that feeling. You're not alone in that experience. In their work, The Relational Soul, Richard Plass and James Cofield said, "Loneliness is one of the most universal experiences. What does loneliness tell us about ourselves? Be it chronic or acute, slight or significant, loneliness is proof of our relational design. At the core of our being is this truth: we are designed and defined by our relationships. We are relational souls. We cannot not be relational." In other words, loneliness is a universal thing. People, every part of the world, every nation, tribe, tongue, whatever, every part, people understand and have experienced loneliness. Why? Because God made you for relationships. God made us for relationships. And that's why in Matthew 11, kind of our text for the next few weeks as we talk about the lifestyle, the practices, the rhythms that Jesus invites us into, that's why actually the you in "come to me, all you who are weary," when we think about that, and probably because Clint, you're just an easy target I like to make fun of, but you're probably overwhelmed by now, maybe by too many papers, things like that, and you read Matthew 11 as your phone screensaver saying, yes, when I'm weary and burdened, I need to come to Jesus. And actually, the you's plural. All of you come to Jesus. Maybe even come to Jesus together. I will give all of you rest. Learn from me together. All of you will find rest for your souls. Jesus invites us not just to be individuals that follow him, but to follow him together. That's why Jesus calls us into community, to be disciples and followers, to be members of a larger body. Jesus loves individuals, yet Jesus lived, died, was raised, and is coming again, praise God, to make a people, his people. He's not just interested in you and your personal relationship, as incredible as that is, as important as it is to have alone time with God. Actually, Jesus is inviting you into community, into people, into intimacy, into relationship. For me, my problem in life for a while, and probably in high school and early years in college, was loneliness. But that was kind of solved as I got invested in and plugged into a church. But then the problem after loneliness, and when you get invested into community, the problem isn't loneliness, it's people. And specifically, church people. Let's just call it what it is. Sometimes, as many of us have experienced it, you get out of this thing of loneliness and you step into community, but then the problem isn't that you're alone. The problem is that people are difficult and they're annoying and they're hard to deal with. Am I just airing my grievances, or you know what yeah. Because you come to my office to talk about people. Okay. But you get it. People, they're difficult. And truthfully, the question is, just for today, what do we do? Like, how do we do community well? How do we follow Jesus together? How do we live in deep, intimate, thriving relationships? And so I only have 6 minutes left, and it's going to be fantastic because I promise I'll finish on time. But in 6 minutes, I don't want to preach, really. I don't want to just give you, the sermon where we exegete. I just want to talk about 3 maybe lies. And maybe can I just have a big brother moment where I can talk about 3 things in my own life that I've experienced that I think stop me from diving deeply into real community. There's 3 lies. First of all, consumerism. Essentially, we step into community as consumers, not as companions, not as looking for real community. We're looking for a commodity. We're looking for people to meet our needs in certain ways. We're essentially, and how many of us do this? You go and you pick a church based on your list of things that the church has to be. So do they do the music I like? Is it at the beginning or the end? Do they give to causes I'm interested in? How nice are the pastor's shoes? And we all, are they woke enough for me? Are they? And we start to walk into a church, not to be a part of a community that Jesus called us into, but to be a consumer and make sure that they fit into my model, my idea of what a community is. Now, friends, can I just tell you, they're people. Church is people. You are the church. And therefore, the idea of being a consumer, when you come, you're going to be disappointed over and over and over again if you come as a consumer, because no one is going to fit your perfect list. I don't fit your list. I'm sorry. I'm not going to fit your list. The people next to you aren't going to fit your list. And guess what? You're not going to fit the list of other people. But maybe Jesus didn't call us to be consumers. He called us to be a people, a community, part of a church. We have to reject the lie of consumerism. The second one is convenience. Convenience. Do you know how inconvenient people are? People are inconvenient. Let's just be honest. Yet Jesus never seems to be inconvenienced by people. You don't think about Jesus when walking down. Do you realize how many times Jesus got interrupted? You know most miracles happen when Jesus just got interrupted? And he would just get stopped and held up. But he never, can you imagine Jesus? Oh, I was on my way to Galilee, but I guess I'll heal you. Yet Jesus isn't like that. He's inconvenienced by people. He's willing to let people stop him and slow him down. And true community is inconvenient. True community is super inconvenient. Why? Because people don't break down on your timeline. And life doesn't fall apart when I need it to. It typically falls apart when I have my AirPods in and I'm looking at my feed, swiping up as I mad dash to Clint Bryan's house or class up the hill. And then I look and I see someone and they're actually sobbing because their parents are falling apart. It's super inconvenient. Yet Jesus still calls us to be in community outside of our convenience. Consumerism, convenience, and lastly, comfort. And this is so interesting. In Matthew chapter 10, one chapter earlier, if you think about the people that Jesus invites himself into community with, you have these 2 different people. Matthew 10 talks about one, this guy who's a tax collector, Matthew. You have a tax collector, and then you have another guy, a zealot, Simon. Now think about this. A tax collector, they're part of really the system of Rome. They're essentially a person who should be part of the Jewish community, has decided to betray the community in many ways and start taxing other Jews. So they're betraying them politically for sure, and probably there's this element of like, are you even a true part of the community of God? Yet there's this person, and then on the other side, there's Simon, who's a zealot. Zealots were basically known for like going into a group of, like a mob or a group of people. They would have knives hidden under their cloaks, and if they saw a Roman soldier in the middle of a group, they'd kill them in the group, put the knife back under their cloak, and walk away. They're the people who Jesus calls into community together. People who actually politically couldn't be more opposite sides. Won't that say something to us in 2019? The people that Jesus calls us into community with, to commit to, are people who, they don't agree with me politically, they don't agree with me in this, they don't look like the way I want them to look, they say something that offends me, they make that awkward racist comment, and I assume that it's probably because they're malice, but really it's probably because they don't know. And Jesus calls me into being in community with people who are gonna hurt me, who make me uncomfortable. But Jesus called us to deep community, meaningful relationships beyond our comfort. To be in community, actually, it demands a level of discomfort. It demands being vulnerable, being woundable, being hurtable, being breakable. But that's the only place that you'll really be lovable, is when you're in that place where someone can hurt you. But that's also the place that you can receive every form of love. And let me tell you, Jesus knows this himself. He doesn't just command us to do things. He actually experienced it. You do realize Jesus had friends. I hope he was funny. But you could imagine that Jesus actually had friends. He's around people, yet these are people who have followed him, they love him, they've lived with him, they've walked through life with him, and yet they're the people who betray him. And Judas betrays him, or they sleep on him. Ever felt like your friends were asleep when you needed them most? Jesus praying, almost having an anxiety attack in the Garden of Gethsemane, as some scholars would say, and they're asleep. When he just said, would you just pray with me for a little bit? Jesus knows what it feels like to be betrayed, to be slept on, to be abandoned. When on the cross, everyone just left him. No, I'll never deny you. I'll never leave. I don't even know that man. Ever that happened to you with your friendships? And all of a sudden you realize that community is difficult, yet Jesus so understands. And he gets it. And he doesn't get anywhere more than on the cross when he's even saying, Father, Father, like, where are you? And on the cross, you see Jesus who experiences the ultimate form of loneliness so that we would never have to. Do you see like what beautiful thing Jesus is willing to die for and again live for, and he's coming back for it? It's that we would be close and committed to people, to be in deep, meaningful, woundable relationships. I'll tell you, nothing has been more transformational in my life in the last few years, besides probably Sabbath, as having deep, good friendships. People like Alona, who spoke on Friday, were my best friends, and we get a meal together at least once a month, depending on the month, typically once a month. And she calls me on my crap, and I get to call her on hers. And having people who know you and can see you and can sharpen you. As Proverbs says, deceitful are the kisses of an enemy, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy, but great are the wounds of a friend. And Jesus calls us into that sort of thing. Now, let's just be honest. Some of us really do have some wounds from people. We've been sincerely hurt. We've been sincerely betrayed. And truthfully, we've been probably hurt and betrayed by church people, by people who follow Jesus, people who shouldn't be like that. And as a part of Jesus' community, as part of his church, can I say, I'm sorry for the people in church who've hurt you, who've wounded you, who have betrayed you, who said they'd be there and they won't. I'm sorry for church people who've done that. I'm sorry if I've been the person who's done that and who's let you down. And I wish I could promise you that it's never going to happen again. But the reality is we're probably going to let each other down, and yet Jesus still calls us into deep, intimate relationships with one another, with people who are going to hurt us. Maybe he's on to something. I won't ever forget being in junior high and walking through my church and turning a corner and overhearing two of my youth leaders talking crap about me behind my back. I get what that's like. And they didn't know I was around the corner, but a lot of us have experienced that. And the walls that we put up to protect ourselves so that we're never hurt again by people. But can I tell you, it's worth pulling those walls down and letting people in and letting them help you pull those down. It's so worth it. I think community ultimately is just an invitation to trust Jesus. Consider community as Jesus' invitation to trust him with your relationships, with your lifestyle, with all of it. Maybe it's just Jesus's, maybe it's God's healing. It's his grace in disguise. It's people. It's other people. And so I just encourage you for a moment, maybe close your eyes and just imagine for a second, what could your life look like if you were in deeply committed, meaningful community, deeply invested in the local church, deeply invested in groups, deeply invested in people who knew you, who knew the parts that you don't want people to know about, that stuff, the stuff that when you go around sharing your testimony, you breeze over, you just give enough to be vulnerable, but not to fully tell everything, because what if they hurt me? What if you had people who knew it all, who were part of it all, and you found healing and life and grace, and maybe as Jesus says, rest for your soul? What would this community look like? What would the Church of Seattle look like if we were deeply committed to one another, to following Jesus together? Family, I would just tell you, it is worth it to trust Jesus, to trust him with your relationships, to dive into community. Last week we talked about, and you can open your eyes, last week we gave a spiritual formation plan, a growth plan, and what could your semester look like? Who do you want to become? And one of the questions, and I think we have it on the screen, is about community. And it was, who is my community? Who am I going to actively grow with in this season? And maybe this week you go back to that growth plan and you just look at that one question and you consider answering, who are the people in this season of my life that I can live with and grow with, that I can be open and with, receive healing from, receive some of those wounds that make me better, really become more like Jesus with. Let me pray for you. Father, thanks for making us your own people. Not just individuals. It's cool that this life of following Jesus isn't alone. We don't have to do it alone. And I'll be the first to admit that I've tried to do it alone so many times and it fails and I fail at it. And God, I need your help. We all do, I think, to just follow Jesus well with other people. And so God, would you help us? Would you help us to find deep, meaningful community, deep, meaningful relationships that are transformative? We really want that. God, I pray for some of us in here who are really dealing with hurt and wounds from people who've disappointed us, hurt us, let us down, who weren't there when we really needed them. God, I ask that this would be a great year of healing in our community. God, that you would bring healing to those places and those spaces, that you would bring healing as we open up to you and to your people. Help us follow Jesus well. Amen.